Yes, welcome into the camp. We are back. Badgers nearing the end of the first week of fall camp. They're going to close things out I should say close out the first week on Saturday. They're going to be doing it in full pads. They're going to be in full pads for the first time on Saturday. We're looking forward to it. We'll be able to break it on down. Today, Friday, a little bit of a shorter practice, or at least they said it was going to be a shorter practice. It still ended up being over 2 hours. It's very, very warm out there, but we got a lot of 11-on-11 action, Jesse, which is obviously something that we are all about.
Yeah, you got to love it. It gives us plenty to talk about, and there were a lot of plays made, so it's good news on both sides of the ball.
Yeah, a lot of plays made. Quarterbacks made some plays. Wide receivers made some plays. Running backs made some plays. We've talked about Darian Dupree every single show so far. We're going to do it again today. Preston Zachman on the defensive side of the ball knows how to jump some routes, man, and he had a couple of really nice plays that we'll talk about as well. Before we get there, obviously excited for college football to be back, talk about the game all year, and now we actually get some on-field action here with fall camp getting going, and games are going to be here soon as well. And that also means it's the Can't Miss Kickoff 2024 campaign from Home Field, which is obviously the official apparel sponsor of the camp for a second year in a row. We got some stuff sent to us last year. I loved the old school Bucky logo on the both the shirt, but also on the hoodie. I'm a hoodie type of guy, Jesse. Do you like hoodies? You a hoodie guy?
I like all clothes. It means an extra day without having to do laundry. So any clothes are good clothes in my book.
Yes. So we got some gear sent to us, and I was able to give some of it to the wife who wears the hoodie all the time. Extremely, extremely comfortable. But I'm also, as I said, kind of a sucker for all old school Wisconsin logos, and that's certainly right up their alley. But either way, as part of their Can't Miss kickoff campaign, is their month-long mission to get you everything you need for football season. And they've got these new platinum football boxes coming out. They've got these 3 never-before-seen Badgers items. I've seen some mock-ups of these things, and I think people are going to really, really like them. You saw a hat that potentially is going to be in there as well, and I know you were a big fan of the way it looked. So it looks amazing. Either way, it's also going to have a hat, as I said. It's going to have core collection socks, also going to have a koozie for your tailgate, and a platinum pass. It's really anything and everything you're going to need apparel-wise for the entire season. They're going to be available starting August 9th. What day is that, Jesse? Is that next
1 week, if my math is correct?
Next Friday. Going to be next Friday morning, and you can check it all out at homefield.com. You can use the code Bucky24 for 15% off your first order. All right, let's get into some of what we saw on Friday, Jesse, as it was day 4, and Wisconsin was down in Platteville again. We weren't really sure what we were going to get, right? We didn't know when they said shorter day, like what exactly you're going to get. And we ended up getting a ton of 11-on-11 stuff. Where did you want to start? Do you want to start with the quarterbacks? Because I think that there was some good stuff from both those guys. And obviously they also had their mistakes, but there was do we want to call it a 4-play sequence or a 3-play sequence for Tyler Van Dyke, where made some just absolute money throws. The fourth one was, I guess, incomplete, according to some of our colleagues that were also watching practice, which I'll take their word for it if they thought it was incomplete. But 4 really strong throws down the field, out to the boundaries that were exactly what Wisconsin needs from Tyler Van Dyke.
Yeah, this is the Tyler Van Dyke we've been waiting to see, especially in this preseason. He showed it toward the second half of the spring, and maybe it can be a springboard. Obviously, it's just one series and an 11-on-11, but it's the consistency. And we know about the arm strength, and it certainly helps to have a guy like Bryson Green, who I thought had a really big day, probably his best of the preseason so far, but that was coming off a really good day on Thursday. He showed that ability to create some separation, to go up and get the ball, all the things that we thought he was going to provide when Wisconsin brought him over from Oklahoma State. And he did show that to some degree last season, especially in the bowl game, but it certainly feels like he's carrying that over for another year. And they have some weapons, and that's the good news. And you need a quarterback who can deliver the ball there. And both those guys, both Tyler Van Dyke and Braden Locke, are capable of it, but we've been wanting to see, can you string those plays together? And we saw a little bit more of that today. So that's good news for the offense.
It was good news for the offense. Did any of those big throws from Braden Locke stand out to you at all?
I think he had Yeah,
He
there
had
were a
one.
few good ones.
There was a dot. There was a dot down the middle to Vinny Anthony that was placed perfectly, and it was between. I mean, it was placed perfectly. It was between the two safeties and right over the linebacker. And Vinny Anthony was. Yeah, I mean, he was running pretty wide open, but the ball got exactly where it needed to be when he needed it, and he took a big shot and he held on, and it was. I thought maybe one of Braden's better throws so far of camp.
Yeah,
Is that
I would
fair?
agree. Probably his best throw of the camp. You get somebody down there and you get a chance to take a shot. You want to be able to hit it. And this was, I think, a good day also for the receivers in general. And we had an opportunity to talk to them after practice to be able to show that if they do get those opportunities, that they can take advantage of it. Because I think that's one thing we felt like to a large degree was missing last season on a consistent basis. Yes, you had Will Pauling catching the ball a ton, and I know Luke Fickell talked about this as well. There wasn't a lot of opportunity for him to separate himself. It was just get him the ball, but not a ton of yards after catch. And it feels like they've got more guys that, even if it's same guys on the roster for the most part, better prepared to take advantage in year two.
They are, and some of those guys that were able to take advantage of it today. You mentioned Bryson Green, Trech Kahuna did Trech Kahuna type of stuff. He probably was a little upset with himself, though. Actually, I know he was upset with himself. He had a couple of drops that are not necessarily things that he does very often at all. But I think of all the wide receivers, Bryson Green was clearly had the best day. But it also has a lot to do with being targeted quite a bit as well. I think he had the most opportunities of anybody. He did certainly. I mean, he took advantage of them. What do you think it's other than it just being one day, even though he did have a nice day yesterday as well? What do you think it says that he has been a pretty frequent target of these last couple of days?
Well, it says he's going to be really important, obviously. I mean, he's coming back here off a season that statistically is solid, but not as much as what people wanted. And when we talked to wide receivers coach Kenny Guyton afterward, he said one of the things that he talked about with Bryson when he was evaluating film and trying to figure out what can I teach him that's something different was he wanted to add a little bit more finesse, as he called it, to the power game that he possesses. And I think the word he used was wiggleness, something like that, but just being able to have more versatility as a guy out wide. But we knew coming into even in the spring, the question was, well, you know what you have in Pauling. We think maybe we know what Kahuna can have, and he showed that over the spring. Do you have the threats on the outside to stretch this field and give challenges for opponents? And with Bryson Green, it feels like the steps that he's taking have been substantial.
There were so many close opportunities last year for him to make big plays. I will always go back to the Washington State game where he's running a post route and he's open, and Tanner Mordecai just overthrows him. And I don't know what he can do about that, right? Like, he can only make the plays that are available to make, but he had some opportunities, and the quarterback, for whatever reason, they weren't able to give him the ball. And it just later in the season, especially in the bowl game, we kind of saw him being able to catch some passes down the field. I think he's got I don't know what a big year means for him, right? Because we don't know exactly what this offense is going to be able to put up. But in terms of what Bryson Green is able to do, what we saw today, I think they feel comfortable certainly giving him the ball as much as possible. There's also another part to this, him getting the ball as much as he did, is Will Pauling has been limited a little bit. He had a no contact jersey on today. That didn't stop him from, I don't think he would have gotten touched either way, but he had this catch and run where he beat Hunter Wohler and went down for what would have been a long gain or maybe even a touchdown, just the way that he can run. But that said, he's been kind of held back a little bit, which has allowed other guys to maybe step in and get opportunities that maybe they wouldn't get if he was on the field.
Yeah, one of the things Kenny Guyton talked about was, like, they know what they have in Pauling, and even if you just want to get him healthy to game one, the guy caught 74 passes, and this is a good opportunity even if you are 100%, but if you're not exactly 100%, it's even better reason. What do the rest of these guys have? Because that's really what they need to figure out, and how many guys can Guyton trust to roll in there, how many slot receivers are viable options, and So it's a good opportunity for a number of other players.
For sure. Going back to the running back spot, as I mentioned before, towards the beginning of the show, we were going to talk about Darian Dupree. It was just one rep with the first team. It came later on. It wasn't like it was right to start, but he got the ball and he made a play. And he also got some reps with the second team, and they found the ball, and he feels like he'd make some plays when he gets the ball in his hands. And you asked Kenny Guyton, who is not his position coach, but knows something about guys catching the ball in the backfield, and he essentially was just like, wow. Like when you first started doing it, he's like, wow. And as he gets closer, he said, as he gets closer to the start of the season, maybe he'll stop being surprised at some of the things that he can do.
Yeah. That answer sort of was indicative of what I feel like we've seen here through the first 4 practices. Again, it's not like they're throwing him in there immediately with the top group. It's still the guys that you would expect for the most part, but they Devin Spalding gave him and Dylan Jones more looks, especially with the 2 group. And Dupree's just a difference maker. He is. And I don't know exactly what capacity that, that will be in this season, but I think he had the ball out on the left side and he made a jump cut that was just so impressive. And I don't know whether he would have been tackled or whether he would have gotten through it, but there's just a gear there that is a little bit different. And so each practice, I feel like we're going to continue to say his name as long as he gets those opportunities.
And again, I don't think it's a situation where he is just quickness either. Like I know, and maybe we'll see it tomorrow when the pads come on, but in shoulder pads when he ran through or was going to run through Justin Taylor when he was right there on the sideline. I just think I don't think it's just the quickness and the speed. I think both him and Dylan Jones have the ability and willingness to run through guys at the same time. So full pads. And we know what Luke Fickell told us down at Media Days. They're going to go live. And so if you're going to go live, you're going to give these running backs an opportunity to show you how difficult it is to get them on the ground. And I think both those guys will prove to be very difficult to get on the ground. Same thing with Tyree Walker, though, too. And he continues to impress. So that's the offensive side of the ball. The defensive side of the ball, Preston Zachman. Hello, welcome back. He missed all of spring with an injury, and now he is back, and he got some time with the first team today, and he also picked off a couple of passes.
Yeah, got a lot of run with the first team. Just the instincts that he has. It's come naturally in general because he was a do-it-all athlete in high school and then had to make the transition to playing safety at Wisconsin. But when he gets his opportunities, he certainly takes advantage of it. He picked off both Van Dyke and Locke. The first one was a Van Dyke pass over the middle. And I mean, when the ball was released, I saw what Van Dyke saw, which is this guy's open. And Zachman came up from behind and jumped it and picked it off and took it back for what would have been a touchdown. And then the second one was a Locke pass into I think it was like the left flat or maybe a little beyond that. And same type of deal. Zachman kind of came up from behind and jumped in front and dove and intercepted the pass. So they got a lot of talent there at safety, and Zachman, when healthy, is one of those guys. You look, and he put up pretty solid numbers last season in the opportunities that he did have. So not a great sign from the offense when there are interceptions, but it didn't come from a terrible throw and you say, what was the quarterback looking at because his receiver is 5 yards away? It came from someone having to step up and make a play, and Zachman was able to do that.
Yeah, for sure. We got some one-on-ones today as well. Both, I think it was mostly young guys. And there was a comment on our YouTube, one of our YouTubes, about when Darian Dupree beat Jaheim Thomas in one-on-ones earlier this week. And someone commented, I bet you Xavier Lucas could cover Darian Dupree. And we got the answer to that question today. And the answer is yes, he can. But that said, he was the quarterback throwing the ball was, and do you want to pronounce the name?
The walk-on quarterback that they have.
There you go. All right. The walk-on quarterback they have, the freshman. We do not mean to be, I'm not trying to be mean about it. But for whatever reason, it was really, really late on the throw. But Darian tried to make the same move on Xavier Lucas as he made on Jaheim Thomas, and it didn't work as well. Xavier Lucas is, and Xavier Lucas picked the ball off, but he's another young guy that and we're going to get to our mailbag here in a second because there's some questions about some freshmen. He's one of those guys that I look at and say, and I know we talked about him when we talked about some of the DBs the other day. He's size-wise, he's just very, 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 very well put together, and also very, very smooth. And we saw that in that one-on-one. Again, it's one-on-one, and you're right. The offense is the one that's supposed to have the advantage, right? In those, and at least on that particular one, Xavier Lucas was like, eh. But he's also a cornerback. Darian Dupree is a running back. He should be able to cover it. Correct?
I would agree. Maybe they studied the tape because now Dupree's put it on film, so he knew what he was looking for. But yeah, they've got a lot of talent in this freshman class, and I don't know how many of them are ultimately going to play this season, but they're going to be the backbone of this Luke Fickell program for the future.
Yeah, for sure. All right, let's get into our Friday mailbag. This is something that we did during spring ball when I was doing the show by myself. I feel a little bit better doing it now with you, but we got some questions. We will be having a separate Friday mailbag in a couple of weeks for all the questions from Beers and Taco. No, I'm kidding. We'll get some of them. We'll get some of them in here. He filled them up. He filled up the mailbag with all of his questions, but we'll get to some of them here. Jaron asks. He says, after 4 practices, does the tempo or energy of camp feel any different than last year?
I won't say the energy feels any different. I mean, sometimes that can be a hard thing to gauge in terms of tempo. They were playing fast a year ago. And in fact, the very first spring practice that we saw, I can remember writing about, oh my God, but that's because we were used to what Wisconsin football was before. And it was like, oh, they're throwing it to this side. And then the other quarterback stepping up and they're throwing it to this side. I don't think it's either of those things. I think it's the crispness with which things happen and the understanding that players have. And you will hear that from every interview with every player that was a part of this program a year ago, and it is what you're supposed to say. And it probably is true. And it will only really matter to fans if it translates into victories, but it does feel like they just have a better sense of confidence, a better understanding, and that leads to a sharper execution of drills in practice.
Well, I also think there's an expectation too of being that fast. There was today, just in some of the on-air throwing drills between the quarterbacks and the wide receivers, there was like a delay, and you could see Phil Longo just get annoyed with it. Just like, come on, this is easy. This is not. We need to be quicker. We need to be going faster. We need to be like. There's an expectation, and that expectation is fast at all times. Now, I will say, what we saw back in spring of 2023 was them getting the snap before it hit the 30 seconds of the play clock, right? And yeah. we didn't necessarily see that during the season. We have seen it a few times here in fall camp this first week. I don't know that it will end up carrying over to the season, but I feel like they may be in a better spot to do it this year than they were last year.
I think it's a situation where, well, it'll be situational. I mean, I think what they'll be able to do is use it when they need to. Like, it's not a full game type of thing. They're obviously still going to be a tempo type of team, but if they feel like they have the defense on their heels, or if they feel like they're rolling, they can go to that. And obviously 2-minute drill, that's important too. And that's part of why we saw when Luke was upset with the team, because they were running a hurry up drill and they were not hurried up. And so we threw him off the field and brought in a new group, because that is the expectation and the standard now.
Yep. Beers and Taco. Who gets more playing time on defense this season, Dylan Johnson or Xavier Lucas? If any at all.
I don't think either will, but if I had to pick one, I would say Dylan Johnson, just because what this group doesn't want is a defensive line that is like James Thompson and a bunch of guys. And I'm not saying that's what they are at all. It's just that there are players that need to go prove themselves. Yes, Kurt Neal had some experience, obviously started in the bowl game. Ben Barton, I think, may surprise some people with what he can do, but they're still trying to figure out the rotation. The other 3 guys would seem to be the older guys that could be a part of that 6-player rotation. But I mean, I mentioned this before because I wrote about Dylan and had a chance to talk to him. The upside is tremendous there, what with his wrestling background, and the ability for him to play lower to the ground because he's not a 6'4" kind of guy. With Lucas, I mean, talent is there for both of them. It's just look how many cornerbacks they have that are playing in the first and second group. You've got obviously Ricardo Holman and Nazir Forquerine. You've got Jonas Duclona and Jace Arnold, who had a really nice day on Thursday. So, and that's just a few of them. I mean, Amari Snowden's been out there. I'm sure I'm forgetting one or two. There are so many bodies in the cornerback room. So I think it's harder to break through as a true freshman there right now.
All right. So just a bigger question. Matt asks, which true freshman has the best chance of starting or earning a notable amount of playing time?
I think it goes back to the two guys that I've talked about here this first week. It's Darian Dupree, and I just really like Thomas Heiberger defensively. Again, I don't know what that means in terms of snap count when you have the guys that have been as explosive as they have been, that have the college playing experience. But those would be the two that stand out. Dupree, it feels like he has that it factor. And sometimes we're basing this on only a handful of plays. So I know it's not even entirely fair for us to be making these definitive declarations. And I'm not trying to say it is definitive. It's just sometimes you can tell early that someone has something a little bit different. And clearly in the opportunities that both he and Dylan Jones are getting, it shows that they want to see what those guys can do with a first group or a second group. So those are the ones that initially come to mind.
Do you think Darian Dupree could be running back 3 at some point?
Yes.
Because right now, right. Because right now it's Cade Giacomelli and Jackson Aker would be behind the first two guys.
Yeah, I think the reason why I think it's possible is because he gives them something different and something that can be really dynamic. And I mean, everybody has their own role. I think Jackson Aker will have a role on this team. I wonder whether it's more as a blocker out in front of another running back because of his background as a fullback in 2022 when he was the starting fullback. Like, they can do things that are similar to what Wisconsin did in the past, but get to it in a different way, which is what we heard all of last season when they were talking about not having a fullback, but putting an extra tight end in there and stuff like that. So, but with what Dupree possesses, it feels like you want to give that guy an opportunity. The question is how much of an opportunity will be left, or will he be able to surpass those guys? And will he be able to have the knowledge of the playbook that's necessary too? Because it's one thing to have raw talent and skill that you see in week one. It's another thing for them to implement a plan and for you to be able to execute it.
Miami Rising asks, how are they using Tretch? Is he getting first team reps?
He's gotten a lot of first team reps, again, in part because of what we were saying earlier, is Will Pauling doesn't need to get every rep after the season that he had. They can do a lot of different things with him. Obviously, he can just get the straight up 1 reps in place of Pauling. They can line him up where there's multiple slots to give defenses a headache with both Pauling and Kekahuna. But I mean, they're going to move him around because he's so versatile, but he is a true slot receiver in this offense, which is what Phil Longo loves. And when he gets the ball in open space, he's very difficult to bring down. And that's another thing that Guyton even mentioned, is he knows who he is. And the way he put it is, and this is obvious, but he's not a 6'3", 200-pound wide receiver. But what he meant by that is Tretch knows what his strengths are, and so he needs to play to those strengths. And for him, it's, well, if he's going up against a defender who's bigger than him, figure out a way to use your leverage to create space and keep the hands off. So once you get the ball, you can do something with it. And he's definitely been able to show that he can do that.
Another aspect for him is on special teams too. He said today that he was running with the ones on punt return, and so he could end up being their punt returner. I know certainly Vinny Anthony is also in the mix back there as well, but I love the idea of Tretch as a punt returner. Though he did say it was kind of weird. He was talking about how he's some ball security issues, like that's a pretty big thing back there. Right? Catching the ball. The only thing I ever learned from Bill Bush, and I didn't really even need to learn this from Bill Bush, but the former special teams coach for Wisconsin back under Gary Anderson, he was also the safeties coach, I think. But he said the most important, the only result that matters after a punt or a punt return is you have the ball. That's the only thing that matters. Doesn't matter what you do. It doesn't matter about anything else. As long as you have the ball, it's been a successful punt return.
The other thing that you will hear, and certainly we've heard over the years from coaches, is that notion of hidden yardage and how, I mean, look, if you can field it, that's very important, because if you bobble it and retain it or you let the ball roll, all of a sudden you lost 15 yards. That's a big deal. But if you remember, and you go back to that, the special teams practice that Luke likes to have with the group in the spring, Tretch mishandled one of the punts from what I remember. And that's priority number one. But once he has the ball in his hands, he's capable of making a play. And he didn't have a chance to showcase the punt return skills during his true freshman season, but he did have 2 kickoffs, and one went for a really big gain against LSU, and the other one he had against Nebraska. And he only ended up playing in 4 games. So there's a lot of potential there from a playmaking standpoint in special teams.
There is. You talk about the hidden yardage, and it always brings you back to a visual of, it must have been maybe 21, maybe 22 in term on a punt. And Jim Leonard is, I'd say he's the best punt returner in Wisconsin history, but you could make an argument for a few other guys, but I'd put him up there. And one of Wisconsin's punt returners let the ball bounce, and he's on the sideline just absolutely losing it. Like, he is just so mad because he would go catch the ball anytime, anywhere, any place it needed to be to save 5 yards here, 10 yards there. And it's huge. It certainly is. If you're not going to be back there, why even have a punt returner? Or if you're not going to go catch the ball, why even have a punt returner? Might as well put 10 guys up there and try and go and block it every time. What's the point? So I'm pretty sure that was his message as well to that guy. It's like, catch the ball. Like, that's what you're back there. You're the punt returner. You return the ball. So go get it, catch it, and save us some yards, or go get some yards. If you had to pick a starting lineup for a game tonight, who's your quarterback, your running back, your tight end, and your top 3 wide receivers?
Wow. That is really putting me out on the limb here.
That's from Beers and Taco.
Well, I think my quarterback is Tyler Van Dyke, largely based on, I think, what the upside can be this season, the experience, the arm strength, all those things. I think it will ultimately be him. For running back, assuming Chez Mellusi is the Chez that we've seen at his best, it's him. But I also don't know how much that matters when Tawee Walker is doing what he's doing, because I fully believe it's going to be an in tandem type of situation. Now, we haven't had a chance to talk to the running backs yet, or Devin Spalding, but will it be 50-50, 60-40? I mean, both of them are capable of being starters, because I had mentioned the other day that, to me, based on what Walker has done, he is playing of a starter quality. So I would go with Chez, but it could be like a series by series basis. And then was the other question just about tight ends? Just
your top tight end.
Well, I think it's Tucker Ashcraft, because of the versatility that he has, the playmaking ability. He had a really nice day earlier this week. Riley Nowakowski certainly will be there. And then the number 3, I think, is maybe a bit of a question. Is it Jackson McGowan? Is it JT Seagreaves? I think they're still trying to figure that out. I would say they certainly feel comfortable with the top 2 right now, in Ashcraft and Nowakowski, who were 2 guys that were part of the rotation a year ago.
Your top 3 wide receivers, regardless of position, because as we know, these guys have been kind of working inside, outside. They're getting a little more versatility.
Well, I mean, the two are obvious, like Bryson Green, Will Pauling, no doubt about it. The third one, and this is probably why it's a tricky question, is if it's regardless of position, like,
that's what I'm saying. I'm saying it's regardless of position. Well, he didn't say that.
Personally, I want to see Tretch Kekahuna with the ball in his hands, but I don't know that they would ever have. I mean, they have guys that can play both inside and outside, and that's something they're certainly working on.
Yeah, I just don't know if it's Will and
exactly
Tretch.
Right.
Yeah.
So, like, that's a different question from what we will actually see, because it would be Vinny Anthony, at least based on what we've seen so far. But Quincy Burrows and CJ Williams are going to get their opportunities, and they have downfield playmaking ability as well.
Yeah, I mean, if the question's top 3 wide receivers, for me, and maybe it's not totally fair, because I feel like we may have a man crush on wanting just to see the ball with Tretch and see what he can do when he has the ball in his hands. So that's probably not totally fair to Vinny Anthony or to some of the other guys that are playing on the outside. And Vinny can play inside or outside, but in this situation, I would say he'd be there outside, because he's been there outside these first 4 days with the first team unit, along with Quincy Burrows getting some opportunities as well. Is it possible that Chez would fall to running back 2, or is it just going to be straight up a split backfield, you think, between Chez and Tyree?
I don't know that I would see a change before the season opener. Obviously everything comes down to productivity, and if Walker is just an absolute bowling ball, wrecking ball, and he's averaging 6.5 yards a carry, you're going to feed the guy who's performing better. But I do feel like it's going to be more of a split type scenario, because you want to be able to keep both those guys healthy, but also make sure that defenses are on tilt a little bit because they can do something a little bit different. So as long as you're effectively moving the ball, that's a pretty good way to do it.
What are some of the position battles that are still open? That was another part of the question from Miami Rising. It's and like who's getting the most first team reps. I think he mentioned wide receiver 3. Again, I don't know that we can really sit there and talk about a wide receiver 3 just because it's different positions, but outside linebacker, cornerback, safety. I mean, the starting corners are obviously Nizer Forkreen and Ricardo Hallman. And then the slot I think is going to be either between Max Lofi or Austin Brown. So like I don't think there's any debate there. Maybe behind them is where debate would be, like who's could potentially step up. But I think Jace Arnold and I think Jonas Taclona would be the first two, along with Amari Snowden and RJ Delancey. And I probably should put RJ Delancey a little bit higher up on that, but those are, I mean, it's pretty well set there, at least right now, 4 days in and before pads go on and before injuries pop up.
What we've largely seen is, I mean, it is Hallman and Forkreen. There's absolutely zero doubt about it. Hallman's coming off a 7 interception season that was excellent, and Forkreen has certainly come a long way in the last year. But Max Lofi has been the primary slot guy, and what that has allowed Wisconsin to do is have Austin Brown and Hunter Wohler as the top 2 safeties. But obviously, depending on matchup or how they feel, they can move Brown into the slot. And then you've got either Kamoi Latu or Preston Zachman, who, like we said, had a really fantastic day today. It's a good situation from a safety standpoint. The difference with the cornerbacks is what you're asking the second team to do, or potential second team, is come in and play snaps when those guys really have not played at all, other than Delancey, obviously, the transfer that they brought in. So, but for the most part, from a starting perspective on the back end, it feels more set at this point. I'm more interested to see what they do at the linebacker positions. I think the defensive line feels more set too. Just if there's 2 defensive linemen on the field, more often than not, it's probably going to be James Thompson Jr. and Kurt Neal. And if they need 3, Ben Barton will be out there, and Barton will get some run with the ones. But I mean, they're still rotating at the outside linebacker spots. Basically, every combination you can imagine with those, especially the top 3 guys. Pius and Lowry were such a force in the spring that it's hard to keep them off the field. But oh, by the way, Darrell Peterson is the leading returning sack getter from that group. You obviously still have Aaron Witt, and we mentioned Thomas Heiberger. And then inside, there's no doubt in my mind that Jake Chaney is a starter. Everybody has talked about his leadership, but he has been pretty dominant, I think, from his position, and was again today. Yes, he is just breaking into the backfield. He is an absolute disruptor. And so, I mean, is it Christian Allegro? Is it Jaheim Thomas? Obviously, all 3 can be on the field at the same time. Tackett Curtis at this point has primarily just gotten second team reps, but I think that's just a big deal in general because he only practiced full go for 1 practice in the spring. So there are still defensively some things they need to figure out in terms of what does the depth chart actually look like.
And the pads go on tomorrow, and that's when Tackett Curtis probably is going to be able to show a little bit more of what he's about. And I think I'm intrigued to see that. A couple more before we get going here. Jaron says, I know the betting odds are that Van Dyke takes the job, but do you think Phil Longo runs the offense and play calling differently depending on who sits at the top of the depth chart based on their strengths and weaknesses?
No, I generally don't. I think that's what can make that offense strong, is that you don't necessarily have to overhaul or tailor a game plan. The biggest differences are from a physical standpoint, like we've talked about. Van Dyke he can just throw an absolute dart, which we've seen multiple times. And I think he's a little bit better equipped to have some mobility, even though he's not a Tanner Mordecai. But from a what you call standpoint, I think it's going to be the same.
Yeah, I would agree with that. There was one more about the quarterbacks here from Nathan. He says, if there's really no separation from Locke and Van Dyke, why would you consider rolling with the 1-year rental versus the redshirt sophomore?
And I totally get that argument. I also think in the end there will be separation. We saw this in the spring too. It will materialize. Like, they have had 4 practices. They aren't in full pads yet. They have not had any scrimmages. And I envision they're going to have multiple days where they're going to have scrimmages. And to me, that's really when you're going to see someone stand out. I mean, these coaches are watching film all the time. They're around these guys. They're evaluating everything. And so I don't think it's like, oh, these guys are exactly tied. I mean, I think someone is going to emerge, and we'll have to see how it plays out.
I think it's also the idea that this is a win now business. It's not about 2025. It's not about 2026. It's about 2024. And it's winning games this year and putting yourself in the best position to win games. So even if Van Dyke gives you just this little bit, just a little bit of a better chance to win, he's the guy you go with. And I know, especially when it comes to fans, like that's hard to understand. Not even understand. You understand it, but it's hard to accept because you are not just looking at, you're looking at, well, this team's going to be okay this year, but 2025, 2026, maybe that's when they can really, and that's just not how college football coaches look at things. They're looking at the team. They're looking at the person that's going to give them the best chance to win this year, because if they don't win this year, they may not be back next year. Right. Like Phil Longo, he's got some pressure on him. And so he's going to go with the guy that's going to give him the best chance to win now, even if it's only a little bit of a better chance.
That's a fantastic point, and I'm glad that you made it, because these coaches get paid a lot of money. These are their livelihoods. And if you don't win, especially with how much money is at stake, you're not guaranteed anything. And I think about this in the context of having talked to high school coaches from, different cities across the country when it comes to high school recruiting and how coaches view things when compared to the transfer portal. Like, well, it's important to recruit high school guys, but are you going to invest all your time in a high school guy who's not even going to see the field for 3 years? Or are you going to pursue a transfer portal player who can help you win right now? It's obviously still important to have high school prospects. And I'm not saying this specifically in relation to Wisconsin, but in general, because what matters, to your point, is winning right now. You might not get a second chance.
That's college football. That's college athletics right now. Whether it's football or basketball, you got to do what's going to help you very, very soon, because otherwise you may not be here. So Wisconsin will be back on the field coming up on Saturday and in full pads, and we'll be back afterwards to discuss it all. Jesse, thank you very much.
Thanks, Zach.